Well, it's 9:30, so I think once we'll start, and welcome to this long overdue meeting of Finance, Audit and Scrutiny. And the first agenda item is declarations of interest. Do we have any? Second is minutes of the previous meeting, but I just wanted to say that agenda item 6, the active silly business case review, I felt I had to pull that from the meeting because I don't think there was much of a business case in there to review. We didn't really have... there was a dearth of financial figures, shall I say, so I pulled that one, and hopefully it will come to the FAS on the 26th of January, just before full council, which is perhaps a little bit later than we would like, but I didn't think there was an alternative. And which brings me inexorably to agenda item 2.
Mr. Chairman, can I just...
yes, Ted, certainly.
Can I just ask that in the case that we're taking it to full council rather than discussing it here...
No, it's going to FAS first.
Oh, we're having a FAS before full council?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Chairman, I hear what you say. What disturbs me is we have only had one meeting of finance in 6 months. 4 items were down for discussion now. 1 has been withdrawn. And considering that we've all been warned of financial shortcomings and doom, in 6 months we haven't held a meeting of this committee, the most important committee. Pray tell us why.
Right. I think essentially there's been a bit of a cock-up, really. A lack of proper officers, and as we know, the previous finance officer sort of disappeared in September. There wasn't. I was asked not to hold a September meeting and transfer the stuff in that to the full council, and after that, essentially no proper officers really, and it's been playing catch-up really ever since. So I apologise. I think we definitely should have had one, but. It's been quite a 3 or 4 months, really.
OK, Chairman, I shan't have an inquest now, but I am disappointed.
I'm disappointed as well.
Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Chairman, I know I'm sometimes critical of you, but I'd like to congratulate you for inviting us to this meeting today, who are not chairman. And will we be invited to the one on the day of the council?
Well, yeah, I think I'd already said.
I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes, I did put that in the email. But yes, certainly, yeah.
To say thank you for that.
Okay, fine, thank you.
While we're on the subject of clarity, Chairman, I think there might be some possible confusion about the invite to this meeting. So it would seem to me that we've got some members who are waiting to be formally invited to the table, and we've got possibly some at the table. Can we just clear that up? So that we can move on appropriately. If
Councillor Mrs Mumford would like to come to the table, a good point. You may. I think Councillor Mrs Mumford is principally here for the item we're not discussing, though, which is possibly the case with Councillor Daly. Which I do believe does bring us to the minutes. Agenda item 2. Are there any comments?
I propose we accept the minutes as a true record, Chairman.
Second.
Proposed and seconded. All those in favour? I think that's carried. Urgent items. I don't know of anything particularly urgent apart from everything, which makes urgent almost ordinary. But anyway, if there are no urgent items, which takes us to agenda item 4, discretionary rate relief. Over to Mrs Montpellier.
Thank you. Ben was asked to prepare a paper for members on discretionary rate relief, so I've picked that up in his absence. So I've done members a paper on discretionary rate relief. This is business rates. As you're aware, we have mandatory rate relief, which is for businesses, which we are told we have to do by the government. And then we have discretionary rate relief, which is applied and provides certain businesses and organisations with rate relief. So it tops up the mandatory, and it's for businesses, for charity relief, so RNLI, people like that, non-profit making, community and amateur social clubs, those kinds of things, and for certain off-island shops that are below the rateable value at which you can give it. So the paper goes through all the areas where we've given mandatory rate relief, not mandatory, discretionary rate relief. It's been applied kind of haphazardly, I think, especially the area around rural businesses, because you could argue that every single one of our businesses is a rural business, but then it's also limited by its rateable value at £12,000. So at the moment, we just give discretionary rate relief to the post office on St Agnes and the post office on St Martin's. Whether there are any others that could apply, I don't know. We haven't had any other applications other than those two. Now, I would like members to take a decision to say, yes, they want to continue with discretionary rate relief to all categories, or just to charities, or just to charities non-profit, or just charities non-profit and community and amateur social clubs, all of those three, and rural businesses. It's your choice, and what I'd like to do then is tidy up our policy depending on what you want to do, because at the moment it's a bit lumpy.
I have just realised that I am completely in error and should have declared an interest, because I can see that the museum is one of these that has got rate relief, so I can only apologise and leave the debate.
Thank you.
Can I also pass my apologies, as I am a trustee of the golf club?
Oh, right, sorry.
I just wanted to make a point on page 9. The first bullet point at the bottom, it says the rate paying organisations, blah, 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 should be primarily for the benefit of the local community based in Cornwall.
Oh, sorry.
And I just think that's overly generous of us, really.
No, that shouldn't be Cornwall.
And the policy states Preston.
Oh, yes, yes.
Oh, that was because that's the policy we have on our website, which is why I'm saying we need to completely revamp it. Having discovered it, I thought that's wrong.
Extra generous.
We might be getting lots of new friends in Lancashire, though.
Yeah.
Are there any comments? And I don't know who was first. Colin?
Mine's a simple question. The relief given to the post office is entitled shop relief.
Yeah.
Is that really what it's called? Or
Well, it's rural business discretionary rate relief.
it's rural business?
Yeah.
Thank you.
But in our systems, it's called shop relief.
Okay.
But this is why I just feel we need to tidy up the policy, because at the moment we're all over the place. We have a policy on our website from Preston, which doesn't include rural businesses, but we do give them rate relief. So I just need a steer from members. The quantum we're talking about is very small. Our discretionary rate relief bill is less than £10,000 a year. So it's not huge, but we do need to tidy it up.
Pat?
I'd just like to flag, thank you, Chairman, I'd just like to flag the vulnerability of businesses in the winter, especially on these islands. I can say from personal experience, quite frankly, it is extremely difficult to have a viable business on St Mary's, so I dread to think how difficult it is to have a viable business on the off-islands in the winter. My personal view is that the amount, I know we have to look very carefully at all the savings that we have to make, but my personal view would be that we should maintain the status quo, but actually look very carefully at this list and the other services that the Council are actually offering that actually I don't see why we should, and I'm primarily thinking of waste, and I'm going to flag the gig championships, which, as we all know, bring a huge amount of business to the islands. But on walking through the various venues of the gigs last year, it appeared to me that they weren't using grey commercial waste bags. Now, they appeared to me surely to be making a profit, the gig championships. So should they not be buying grey waste bags?
Chris?
I think this is one of the issues that some of us have been trying to flag up when we've had the tourism debate, that there are many, many ways that this authority supports tourism that goes completely unnoticed by the community and the general people that are actually holding events. And the waste issue is one significant one. So I think, Fran, you've just highlighted what some of us have been actually thinking about and know about that happens anyway. Personally, on this matter, at the moment, it's not a fair playing field, in my opinion, because there are no consistency within what is being done. I personally think we should still continue to give relief to all the charities and the non-for-profit organisations. I find it more difficult to reconcile the discretionary relief for those businesses who are able to make a profit. But I would certainly like to hear from other members before I made a decision or made a proposal.
Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you. Well, firstly, I don't entirely agree or disagree with Councillor Saville's comments regarding our efforts to support tourism. I understand the sentiment, but I think that's a debate for a different time. My personal view is that I would consider pretty much every business on the Isles of Scilly to be a rural business. I do agree with Councillor Grottig that it's difficult for everybody to survive through winter. However, I also think in order to level the playing field, we need to be fully aware of the potential, or the reality even in some cases, of some businesses being part of a much larger business structure. So, for example, one business may be in addition to another business and another business and another business. So, whilst in theory, on paper, it might be difficult for one of those businesses to survive in a winter, and technically is rural, but we are all in the same boat. To make it a level playing field, I personally would be more comfortable under the current financial situation that we're looking at, in particular, to continue to support charities and non-profit organisations.
Councillor Grottig.
Yes, I'd just like to point out to Councillor O'Neill that there is a break in that perhaps Mrs Montploki would explain to us about the £12,000 rateable value. It's not a free-for-all. It's available, you can claim for it, but you have to fulfil criteria. In other words, you have to be quite small.
Yeah, you do have to be small, but I think from my perspective it's about having a completely open and transparent system that everybody knows how they can apply or can't apply. And at the moment, we have a completely non-transparent system. And I think what I would like to do is get a stick from you about what you would want in the system, and then I can bring you the written policy at the next committee, and then you can agree or disagree on the detail.
Yeah, absolutely. But also, presumably, it's very much a case of every other financial issue and question that we're facing as an authority at the moment, which is, what can we afford?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sorry. I was just going to suggest exactly that if Mrs Montploki would like to prepare a more robust policy, it could perhaps, Chairman, come back to the next finance audit and scrutiny.
And if I revamp our policy along the lines that we're definitely going to support charitable organisations, non-profit and community amateur social clubs, that's a difficult one, because obviously you have things like the golf club, which has a bar and lots of assets and other things.
Kind of my point about, I mean, that's just one example. It wasn't what I had specifically in mind. I'm not singling out the golf club, but it's an exact, perfect example of what I'm saying, isn't it? About one thing is tied to another to another.
Go on.
Yes, some of the items are very subjective, especially the smaller ones. I've listened to Councillor Grottig, I've listened to all of you, and I'm in two minds. But I do support Councillor Grottig's proposal that this is brought back to us with a more robust details.
Well, all I need from you is a steer
Yes, I know.
from what you want in the policy, because I couldn't rewrite the policy until I understood your wishes. So what I would suggest is I bring you back a policy that's in 4 sections that looks at each of those 4 areas which sit under rate relief, and then what I do is I do a calculation based on rateable values of every other business that might be captured within that. Yes. And then you can make that decision. Does that make sense?
Yes, I don't normally like deferrals, but in this case, I think it's justified.
So essentially what you want is a system that's easy to administer and take us into the future.
Yeah, which is transparent and clear, because I think at the moment I've got no transparency or no clarity over if somebody was to come to me tomorrow and say I want discretionary rate relief, with the system we've got, I wouldn't know whether to apply it or not. And that is really not a good position to be in with any kind of policy. So what I want a steer from you is what you want in the policy, and then I can put it in.
Have we, I'm not altogether sure, have we given you a steer?
Well, I've come to the conclusion that what I'm going to have to do is give you a policy in 4 parts, and then you'll have to do a pick and mix of that 4 bits with a calculation on exactly who falls in and who falls outside.
Very sensible. Avril?
Could you explain, please, why the Gig Association is down here twice?
I think it's because one is they've got 2 premises. So I think it's to do with that situation.
Okay.
Because remember, it's on a property. So I think it's the 2 different sheds that they've got.
Fran?
Yes, apologies for coming back again, Chairman. Thank you. I think the problem is, also, this is a public forum, and I'm very reluctant to discuss any particular business within a public forum, and I'm mindful of my responsibilities in that area. But we do have situations where I'm very surprised that some of these businesses fall within the rateable value criteria. And obviously, sometimes with some businesses, it might be a mix of the rateable value and whether or not they declare themselves to be a charitable, quote, club, organisation or club, because some clubs have quite pleasant, and I would have imagined quite highly rated establishments. So therefore I think that there's so much to discuss that I would totally support the deferral. In fact, if you'd like a proposal, Chairman, I'd be very happy to propose that we defer this item.
What I can do is put you all the rateable values down, because what we could do, for example, for the community and amateur social clubs, is have a level at which the rateable value goes, means that you don't no longer have discretionary status. Does that make sense?
Could it be twinned with profit? Because I know it's going to be incredibly complicated.
You can with amateur social clubs, because in theory they're not supposed to make any profit. All they have is a recycled fund. So they could have a very big recycled fund, but that's unfortunately how it is.
Steve, can I just say,
Yes,
I think Fran has raised a very good point here, that we can't be looking at individual businesses. So a report could possibly bring a total financial contribution if we granted all of those that were below 12,000, was it? Rateable value. That would be a maximum we would actually have to fund if they all applied. And then the different figures, obviously, is partly in here around other, but we can't go through every business. That's not our duty. We need the maximum it could cost us, really, and then so that is what we need.
Yeah, for me, it's just having hard and fast rules that can be implemented. Because at the moment, I don't, and that worries me quite a lot.
Just on regarding the 12,000 rateable value, that would drop the lifeboat out of it, though. And
potentially, yeah. But that's a charity, not an amateur.
Oh, okay, so
that's
what I was going to wonder. Yes, so that's fine, okay.
It's all in the technicality of what they are.
I mean, really, we're looking at two or three on this list, aren't we?
Yeah.
So, Fran has proposed that we defer this. I don't know if you need to do that, really, but does anybody would like to second it? But yeah, okay, so all those in favour of deferring?
And I'll write the policy.
Okay. Colin, I don't think you can vote, though. But however, it's unanimous plus one. So, and all I would say is that, yes, if you go, We have a fairly dense meeting on the 26th with a very short timeline, so let's hope everything goes smoothly on the day. I have my doubts, though.
What time is the meeting on?
I think it's 9:30.
9:30 for FAS.
And then 11 o'clock full council.
11 o'clock.
Which brings us to agenda item 5. Which is in the supplement pack.
Yeah.
Whole council budget monitoring.
Yeah. I'm presenting this on behalf of Andy Brown, our Section 151 officer. I worked closely with Andy on delivering this. This is the first, and I have to apologise for this. This is your first whole budget monitoring. Individual committees have budget monitoring, but this is first whole council budget monitoring. I think the key thing is what we already know, which is that we are looking to be overspent this year, and that's in paragraph 2.6, where we're looking at an overspend of about 400,000, 450,000, and that's largely because of the way that certain aspects were treated in the budgets last year. So, for example, the Better Care Fund, as those members who are at Community Services know, was treated as an income and a debtor, but with no expenditure. Well, we only get the Better Care Fund if we spend money on appropriate things that we then claim the money in arrears for. So, things like the physiotherapist service and others. So we know that we had an issue, and that's been flagged at the individual committees. We know, for example, that we have it looking at a probable overspend in waste of between 100,000 and 120,000, is my understanding from Craig. Obviously, until that crystallises, we can't be sure. What we're doing at the moment is financial outturn work with all departments so that we can work with them to work out exactly what we're spending. What we've also done is take everybody's purchasing power down to £1,000 outside of CLT, which means that CLT members have to sign off any purchase over £1,000, so it can be properly scrutinised. Anything over £5,000 has to go to the CLT as a group for discussion.
Just add, because I think this came up in a previous meeting, I don't remember which one. I think figures under £1,000 will go to the service managers.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously not.
Yeah, they're not randomly spent.
So, yeah, okay.
Yeah, but it just means that anybody else, it limits their spending, so we shouldn't have any rogue purchases. We shouldn't anyway, but sometimes people get overly excited. Avril.
Yeah.
What you like?
Yeah. Ted, you had the
just
first one.
going on a little bit from what Diana said about waste, there is a likelihood that in the future that overspend will be mitigated by, hopefully, and it is hopefully at the moment, a reduction on the costs that are coming in over the new contracts. We haven't got any contracts signed, sealed and delivered yet, but there is certainly hope that this figure, the overspend, next year will be mitigated by what we're going to save on the new contracts.
Yeah.
I can't go into any more detail because it is commercially sensitive. However, it does give us a little bit of hope for the future.
Yeah. And
is that reasonable?
And I think that's very sensible. I think from my perspective, we have a really good grip, I think, on what we need to spend next year or not need to spend next year. This year, if I'm being frank, isn't great, but what we need to do is make the best that we possibly can. A lot of the savings that you'll see in departments, so a lot of the overspend is being mitigated by underspend elsewhere, by being careful elsewhere, we can deal with some of the issues that we know we have in community services and that we know we have in waste. So a really good example is carrying the amount of vacancies that we're carrying, which comes to nearly £600,000. So that helps to mitigate costs. Unfortunately, you don't always have those vacancies where you would want those vacancies to be. But we need to be really tight for the next 3 months, try and mitigate and manage the overspend that we're foreseeing as we come in, and make sure that the budget we set for next year is totally realistic and real and has no surprises like the treatment of the Better Care Fund.
Yes, Chairman, I hear all that, but it looks as though that we are, in the end, going to have an overspend,
Yep.
which in order to avoid a budget deficit, it will have to come out of reserves to make sure. And so, can you give me an idea, what will the reserves be on the 31st of March, roughly?
Without having the full statement of accounts signed off, I can't do that, because the statement of accounts sets what the reserves are going into the year and then goes from there. I don't think it will be healthy. I think it will be significantly less than £500,000, which is below the threshold that members have set. I think our job will be to look at how we move some of the reserves that are ring-fenced, but don't need to be ring-fenced, back into the general fund. So we have all sorts of odds and sods, like 20,000 for the one-stop shop and things like that, we can be put into general reserves quite rightly. And where we've taken money out of the general reserves, when we said we were going to borrow, we need to put that money back in through borrowing.
Chair.
I think your Vice Chair's been waiting for quite a
I
while.
know, he initially nudged me.
That's all right, Steve.
get to see
Can I ask you, I've got 3 questions actually on 2.1, the actual budget monitoring. First of all, why is health scrutiny so overspent? You know, I don't see any reason why that committee should be overspent. Secondly, why have health and wellbeing had such an increase in their budgeting? And thirdly, what is the project?
Thank you. That was mine too.
Right.
Sorry, Diana.
The project is money that's for capital that hasn't moved out. So that's a technical thing, but
yes, fine.
Is not really an issue.
No.
I think we were hoping it was more sinister than
No,
that.
it's nothing sinister. So health scrutiny is because now Health Watch sits in there.
Right.
And what was the other one?
Why has health and wellbeing suddenly become so rich?
Health and wellbeing, because that was where the Health Watch should have been. So it's taken out of one and gone into the other.
Right. The reasoning behind that? We don't pay Health Watch, they're over 100,000.
No. But because we've made savings in year on that one, because we lost a member of staff.
Right.
So 50,000 goes into health scrutiny from Health Watch. So that's the increase in Health Watch. The decrease in health and wellbeing is from the member of staff and the Health Watch going into health scrutiny. Yeah, it is. Health Watch is in the region of £50,000 a year. And well, if you consider on costs, pension, NI,
It's 1.5, I think.
you know, because that post is recognisable, I won't comment on the cost. But remember, the cost that the individual gets paid is very different than the cost to the council, because, for example, pensions are sometimes something like, is it 16 or 20% of the salary of the individual? So it makes a huge difference to how much that person costs as a whole to the council.
Steve, can I come in?
You may.
I think that the other issue that needs to be noted is that there is a timing issue, because the health and well-being, part of that is funded, or as part of the budget setting, the public health grant was part of that. So the grant will have come in, but some of the expenditure has not been taken out yet. So there is a delay, there's a timing delay that reflects.
And sometimes we have it the other way round.
Yeah.
So the AONB is a really good example. So the money for the AONB goes to the Wildlife Trust in April, but we don't claim from DEFRA 75% in December and then 25% in March. So you'll have a difference. And because we do flat line profiles, you get lumps and bumps throughout the year, which is why it's budget monitoring to a certain extent. The way that we've historically done it doesn't really make much sense. It gives you an idea of where you are, but not the detail.
It's for that reason that our Section 151 officer would like to change the way that the figures are presented and move away from the traditional presentation, but to be much clearer in terms of expenditure and income and timing. Hence, the instruction by the 151 officer to develop some outturn figures from now until the end of the year, so we have much more clarity in where we are going to fall with our budget. So that will enable us to be much more proactive in actually managing the budget and managing the resources going forward.
Which we'd already done in September anyway, but this allowed us to give a more up-to-date one, which is why we're working on about £400,000 to £450,000 overspend as our potential outturn figure.
Well, really anything at all we can do to actually pin it exactly where we are in our financial situation is useful, because you do get the feeling that you're trying to pilot a ship with an extremely dodgy compass, and it's very problematic.
Yeah, it isn't easy, and our systems are opaque and they're not very transparent and they're incredibly difficult to work with. And as I've discovered as I've gone along in the last 4 months, accountancy in local government is completely different than accountancy anywhere else in the world. It's not like a household budget, it's not like a business budget, it's not like a profit and loss account. But what we do need to do is make sure that we're capturing everything and that we're controlling costs as best we possibly can.
And that they are being correctly coded.
And correctly coding.
Yes,
A lot of our issues stem from that. Yeah, we have been asking for months to adjust the timing so that we can actually use the figures sensibly, because otherwise it doesn't work. You alluded to the review of earmarked reserves. That's ongoing, isn't it?
That's ongoing at the moment.
Realistically, when will we have some results from that review?
We're hoping, a lot of it depends on the MERS report, which is Movement in Reserves report, which comes out in the Statement of Accounts. So it all depends on when the Grant Thornton sign off the Statement of Accounts, and they've got a meeting at the end of this week when hopefully, fingers crossed, that will happen.
So we should have the information for the first meeting, the 26th.
That is what we're planning on, yeah.
Yeah, no, I know we have to, but I'm just
But no, that's what we're planning on, because to be honest, it's difficult. Without having that line drawn by Grant Thornton, it's very hard then for us to, because otherwise if your baseline moves, everything else moves. So it's about making sure that that's right, then whatever we give you moving forward should be right.
It's my understanding, regarding reserves, it's my understanding it's already council policy from before my time, really, to be able to capitalise these assets, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just for the benefit of the wider world, really. So it doesn't really have to go back to committee, because this does have to be done as ASAP, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's worth noting that we often took a decision, for example, to borrow to do things, so the roads are a really good example, but then we never borrowed. So it's about catching up with the decisions that members made previously.
Grant.
I'd like to start by commending the wish for clarity, because obviously that is absolutely pivotal to everything. And I'd also like to thank Mrs Montpellier for working so hard, and also to welcome the appointment of Mr Brown, who, as you know, gave us a presentation the other day that I found very helpful. I would just say, though, that I think the pivotal thing, the most important thing we've got to be at the moment is self-aware. And we've also got to be aware that when we give a statement, and I don't wish to be critical, such as we've made £600,000 of vacancy savings at the moment, that we offset that by saying, but of course some of those vacancies will result in buying in of services which have to be offset against the vacancies. So what might sound like the sunny pastures of saving 600,000 is possibly the more prosaic uplands of only saving 200 or possibly even 150,000. And I think in order to know where we are, we have to say that at the same time.
Yeah, but what I don't do is count the savings in those services where we use a lot of agency staff. So what I don't do is count vacancy savings from Park House, because actually you can't count vacancy savings from Park House, because you're always in flux in Park House, and you have to look at the overall budget and work it as the overall budget.
Yes, but as we move now to discussing further on in this meeting outsourcing of services, then obviously we might make a nominal, what might appear to be a huge saving here, but actually if we're outsourcing and buying in services, it will of course be fiscally neutral or even give the person who's providing the services a modest income stream.
Potentially, but what you would look to do if you're outsourcing services, that would only make sense to do that financially if you could make a saving. So it doesn't make sense unless you can do that, would be my view. Or where you have no choice. So for example, we occasionally, like with the adult social care social worker, we have to buy agency staff because we need to have 2 social workers available to be on call. So sometimes there are reasons why you can't carry a vacancy.
It's like any transaction anywhere that only happens if it's mutually beneficial, basically.
Well, you hope.
Well,
yeah.
That's the basis you go into the transaction anyway. Councillor Daly.
Okay. I've got 2 questions. One concerns this question of borrowing to top up our reserves. Is it actually legitimate to do that?
I wouldn't say it's topping up reserves. What it's doing is borrowing where we said we were already going to borrow. So what we've done is we've spent money that we... No, what we did was we had a number of projects where we said as a council we were going to borrow.
I understand all that.
So, for example, the 1.4 million on roads.
Presumably we've paid out that money.
Yeah, from our reserves.
So when we get the bank loan, we're just going to put it in our reserves.
Yeah, because it's money that's how it would have happened previously if we hadn't used the reserves, and it's completely legal, and that's what every other authority does.
Okay. The second one is we've often been brought up by our auditors on the question of internal audit.
Yeah.
Are we any better at that now?
We've got a new internal audit, which is a company called Gateway Ashore, who were openly procured through a procurement process. We have a 3-year contract with them, but with a yearly break clause, depending on what comes from the inter-authority agreement with Cornwall. And yeah, my experience with them has been very, very good.
So that won't appear in the auditor's report this time then?
Hopefully not.
Just.
But remember, it will be next year's audit because they're in this year's financial year.
I mean, the reason why the reserves are in the situation at the moment is because we did spend nearly £1.5 million on roads, and if we hadn't done that, they would be very healthy. And
I know that, but I just, I thought if I was a person tried to do something like that, I'd have quite a difficult job to put it over to the judge. It sounds as though you're getting fairly near the wind doing this sort of thing.
No, it's completely normal business for local authorities.
Ted.
Just delaying borrowing.
My question is probably outside of the detail that we've been talking about, and its generalisation. It's about the procurement process itself.
Yeah.
The procurement process that we have to go through, and I recognise that we have to go through it and the like, is unwieldy, and it ends up being exceptionally expensive. There are occasions where I've seen and other councils will have seen the fact that tenders have come in, and because it is a local authority that has put that tender out, the tenders that have come in are massively inflated compared with what we do on private business. I'm not expecting a specific answer to this at all. I'm just illustrating it to a large degree. There are situations that we are in at the moment as an authority where, in my opinion, we are paying over the odds for services provided because of the procurement process. I understand that we are not allowed, as I would running my own business, go to a supplier and say, give us a deal on that.
It's even more stricter than that for us.
I realise, yes, and I realise this. The question that I'm asking on the back of that illustrative spiel is there any way that we can go to central government and claim a unique situation because of the lack of number of suppliers that we've got, where we are able to open negotiation to reduce these costs? Because I'll be quite frank with you, on some of them they are absolutely outrageous, and I think we all recognise that.
We recognise that, but what I would say is there is not a chance in hell that we would be able to change the procurement processes. Not only are they managed by UK legislation, they're also an EU directive. So if we didn't follow the regulations, the 2015 procurement regulations, the whole of the UK would be infraction of a European directive. And because the UK government spearheaded those regulations through the European courts, it's really unlikely that the UK government would restrict them.
I understand, and you know I understand as far as that is concerned, but what I'm actually saying is it's time that we started, as an authority, kicking against it on the grounds that it is costing the individual ratepayers of these islands a significant amount of money each year. And I mean that in significant lumps. And I'm sure that you understand that, Diana, as much as anybody else does. And it is significant amounts of money.
I think also, sometimes what we do is that in the past we've done deals with people, but what that's meant is that we've had non-compliant work done. We're still dealing with some of our compliance issues now, and we've had things done not in a completely health and safety manner. I think from my perspective, it's about, we have a set of rules that we have to follow by law. It's just the same as the rules we have in children's social care, the rules we have in adult social care.
I'm not saying we should step outside of that for one moment. What I'm saying is that we, as an authority, as a unitary authority, ought to be saying to central government loud and clear that this is costing GB PLC significant amounts of money, and there is waste going on by the million. It's not by a few quid here and there as well on a lot of these contracts.
It's my understanding of this. Now, I actually broadly agree with a lot of what you said. However, and I just spoke to Terry about this a few weeks back, and the reason all these laws came in was because of immense amounts of graft and corruption within the public sector and envelopes and things. So it's actually, bizarrely, it's cost effective.
I understand. I'm not convinced that it is cost effective.
Well, I'd take issue with that. System,
I would take issue with that. However, what I'm saying is I think we, as a local authority, ought to be kicking against this system to get a better system in place, that we are able to get a realistic price for a job. I don't mind paying the correct price for a job to be done, but I object to being taken to the cleaners every time a tender goes out.
I would question that we are taken to the cleaners every time a tender goes out. I think part of our problem is that we don't have a great deal of competition on our contracts. But that's our geography and our isolation as much as it is anything else. And that adds cost to every single thing that we do.
Ted, I'd refer you to the Frank Sinatra song High Hopes and point out that it's actually wholly unrealistic, the song. Yeah. Go on.
Chairman, I listened to all that Ted said, and I agree. Now, I've not owned a business, but I've spent my life in the private sector earning a living, firms that run government contracts and civil contracts. Now, we are going to be asked in the next year to make savings, primarily, not entirely, because the government has cut the revenue support grant. And we can go to them and say, look, we can't meet your requirements. But Ted has pointed out quite rightly that anything we can do, we can look at this, and that suggestion on supplies and procurement is constructive. We can say, look, can we do this in order to try and cut down the gap? It's common sense. I hear what you say, it's law, but we are now they ought to imply or apply common sense. We can do our best to cut it down if we are given the kind of freedom that Ted's suggestion. It's common sense, Chairman.
Christine?
No, I think the chairman was...
Oh, sorry, Amanda,
Yeah, I was just going to propose the recommendation.
I've forgotten actually what it was.
Chairman, I will second that,
Yes.
but I will just say that sometimes you have to spend money in order to save money, and procurement is possibly one of those things when you consider any, if a case went wrong in any shape or form, this council could be taken to the cleaners. Yeah, and we are where we are, and no government is going to, or the EU, I don't think, are going to change their procurement policy for the Isles of Scilly. And I'm sure other authorities and other public sector people are really frustrated by it as well. But we have to live by the rules. Yeah, but I think there are more important things for the council to be dealing with government around than this one.
Chairman, having been told that this borrowing from the bank is legal.
Can you not switch it?
No, I can. Yes, sorry.
How much are we going to borrow?
I will pass you over to...
I would say we don't know. We would not borrow more than we need to borrow to put us back into the position we need to be in. But considering that we said we were going to borrow over £4 million over the last 5 years that we never borrowed, you could say it's up to that amount.
So there's no real problem at all then?
Well, no, you don't want to just keep spending your reserves, because at some point they will run out.
Yeah, but if you can borrow up to £4 million...
Yeah, but you can only borrow where you actually legitimately increased your asset base
what is
or
that
did
sum?
something.
What is that sum? Is it £1 million? Is it 2 million? £500,000?
We have very little borrowing, so we can borrow quite large amounts, but it's got to be where we have increased our asset base or done something. So, for example, the roads, because you still have to pay the revenue cost of that borrowing. So if we were to borrow the 1.4 million for the roads, then the revenue cost of 80,000 a year that we would have to pay back would have to then come out of the revenue budget. So what you wouldn't want to do is just randomly borrow lots of money and then pay it all back, because that wouldn't be a good idea. That would be like some dodgy debt consolidation scheme.
Well, it all sounds like that to me anyway. But if we're supposed to have reserves of £1 million...
At least £1 million in general fund. We have other reserves.
So we could borrow £1 million and put it in reserves?
No, it has to be against an asset.
Yeah, but how much is it? How much can we borrow?
We can borrow more. We've had permission to borrow up to 4 million. Yeah, but we could borrow more because...
No, but I'm not saying up to 4 million. 1 million is what we need to square the books, and we can borrow that.
But my view is that we take advice from the technical accountants at Cornwall about what is the right amount to borrow
What
and
does
how
our
we
chief
do
executive think on that?
Well, there's clearly there's a prudent amount here, which I don't think anybody around the table is absolutely aware of at the moment, but we will get advice on that, and then we will do it, because it would be silly to borrow the maximum amount just to have a bank account which looks good when it's actually going down because of interest. So I think we'll get advice on that, but it's a good question.
What does our chief executive think about that?
I think I concur with the chairman that we need to take the advice of our Section 151 officer and the work the technical accountants are working through at the moment with Grant Thornton, our external auditors, to agree the right and correct level in terms of borrowings to assure that we have sufficient general reserves and do not waste any resources.
So that's a piece of work which we will receive at our next meeting.
Which is ongoing at the moment, which is, as Diana just
We
pointed
will
out.
know the sum on the 26th.
Correct.
No,
Well,
no, I don't
Not the
think
borrowing,
we can,
not borrowing, no.
we can't commit to that
Not to
until we
borrow-
know what our outturn at the end of
Outturns,
this
yeah,
year is
yeah.
going to be. Because, and what we want to do in the following years. Because we may want to borrow to save money, to put in a piece of kit and equipment which will save money. We might want to capitalise buying a new fire engine. We don't know until we get to that position. So I wouldn't like to say we've got a clear-cut answer for you at the end of this month. It will be an
Not on the borrowing,
ongoing discussion.
But it will be, we should have a clear-cut view on the level of reserves that we have available, which will start driving that process.
Sounds like a politician's answer.
Can we now? Can we yes?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I might be completely wrong, but presumably when we give a service to that, it needs to be borrowed and that before the meeting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, I think now, can we take this one to a vote? I think we've been proposed and seconded, and I think it's certainly about time we did that. All those in favour? Would you like to pretend to vote, Colin? You may if you wish. Would you like to pretend to vote? Okay, right. Okay. Well, I think that's... Okay, that's so... That was, I think, unanimously carried. Yeah. Any votes against, actually? I don't think... No. Agenda item 7, the inter-authority agreement with Cornwall.
Chairman, before you actually finally dispose of item 6, we decided as a council on this some time ago, several months, a year, I don't know, plus, that we wanted to see this this question resolved. Why has it still not been done?
Which question?
Which question?
Active silly business case.
Sorry.
Agenda item 6. I'm sorry to drag you back to it, but we're saying we can't consider it now because we haven't got the figures, and yet we asked for these figures a long time ago. Why?
Well, I did see some figures yesterday, but I didn't think... two reasons. Primarily, the figures I saw yesterday were not adequate for us to make to scrutinise a business case, and secondly, it was too late.
Yeah, I'm not criticising your decision to pull the item, but what I'm saying is we should have had this information some time ago.
Yes, I agree, but I think that's happened a number of times in the recent past. That we have not been given the financial information in quickly enough. Basically, we have a very under-resourced council at the moment, and this is becoming problematic. But hopefully we will get it by the 26th.
So are we intending to boost our finance department?
Well, I think that's a question for another day, really, because we need to get on with the meeting as it stands. But yeah,
The inter-authority agreement.
yes, and actually, and also, well, yes, and this is part of it, Colin. Yeah. So, agenda item 7. Teo, would you like to lead?
Thank you, Chairman. This is a brief update on where we are with establishing the collaborative agreement or arrangement with Cornwall Council. As a quick reminder, members discussed this on the 27th of September at full council and resolved that we would continue the negotiations with an overarching agreement which will then have a number of schedules underneath that are based on a business case for each collaborative effort that will come to members for full approval. The work has been not as fast as I had hoped, mainly due to capacity issues. We are now at the stage that the draft is being prepared for an overarching agreement, which is almost like the umbrella agreement, which sets out the governance arrangements and the principles for collaboration. And then underneath that overarching agreement will the individual business cases being brought to Council going forward. That work is happening in parallel because there is two elements to this. The overarching agreement needs to capture existing agreements that are already in place and were established in the past on an ad hoc basis, such as the appointment for instance, the monitoring officer, Director for Public Health, Section 151 officer, some areas around where we work with Cornwall Council on trading standards, for instance. So those will be mopped up, and then business cases for new arrangements to be taken forward. The overarching agreement and the schedule with Cornwall does not mean that Cornwall is always the body or the authority or the unit that we work with all the time. As a local authority, we have to be very, very clear that we select and identify the best partner for delivering what we need as a local authority. So the overarching agreement provides a framework, but then individual business cases will be taken forward. The final point I was going to make is clearly there might be some conflicts of interest arising from the development of the agreement because currently we do use the legal services in Cornwall and they are very heavily involved in the drafting. I've discussed this with government and the LGA, and we have secured some additional external resource to provide the assurances that the overarching agreement and the individual business cases are in the best interest of this authority, and so therefore we will get independent advice going forward. And that was all I was going to say, if there's any questions.
Chair.
Yeah, I mean, it's good news about the LGA funding for that legal advice. I think it's extremely important that we have that sort of external scrutiny of the arrangements, not to mention the advice. I'm happy to propose recommendations 1 and 2, but what I would say is we need to crack on with this very quickly in order that we have some real figures to talk about. The absence of any numbers worries me greatly. I realise at the moment this is the umbrella, and I completely endorse what the Chief Executive has said, but it needs to come back to Council with some fairly sharp information on it so that we can make proper decisions.
Each business case needs to come back to
Yeah,
Council.
no, I realise that,
absolutely.
but I'm talking about the urgency of this rather than... It isn't a situation which can drift. It has to come back and be promptly reviewed.
I totally agree, and particularly in light of the comments made by Councillor Mawson with regards to waste, that's clearly an area.
I think Chris next.
I think Fran will.
Oh, maybe Fran is.
I was just going to ask if we could just go back to the 27th of September in our minds, and when we discussed this particular arrangement, the Vice Chair of Finance, Audit and Scrutiny, Councillor Saville, did ask that we put in another recommendation, which was that any substantive change in service delivery did come back. And I think that although it was mentioned that that would be covered by standing orders is currently, I understand, we're working on possibly redrafting those. And I think that we should bring back to the table the fact that any substantive change in service delivery should come back. 2 members.
I think, if I may, Chairman,
Yes,
I think I'm reassured by what the Chief Executive has just said, that each business case will come back to Council, and that will be on every appointment or part, that it comes under the umbrella of this agreement. So, obviously, I am reassured, and obviously members will look out for that and monitor it, how that goes, but I have no reason to believe that that won't happen. However, I do have a question. Could I ask, how do the sponsors board and the steering group relate, and are these going to actually incur considerable costs?
I don't think there will be considerable costs.
Right.
the kind of initial thinking, and of course the terms of reference are being drafted as part of the collaborative agreement, is that the sponsors board has the oversight to assure that the right performance reports are coming back to members, so that members can satisfy themselves that whatever agreement is in place is delivering for this authority what it intended to deliver, and does this into a standard which is of sufficient quality for this authority. The steering group, I would see that very much emerging as the working group on the individual schedules. So you have a steering group that oversees, for instance, the management of the waste arrangements we put in place.
So in a way, the sponsors board for the agreement will be set up and there for in perpetuity to monitor it and be the...
With various councils throughout the country, is this basically sort of standard model?
The model is standard. There's quite a variety of different arrangements in place between council and local authorities. And of course, what is emerging at the moment is that local authorities are innovative in trying to develop which arrangements work best and which are most cost effective and efficient in delivering. It's quite a learning curve. Some local authorities have gone on the route, if you like, to creating separate companies, joint companies, where they deliver the services through. What we are trying to develop here is a collaborative arrangement which doesn't create agents for each other. So, which means that we are not saying everything needs to go through this collaborative arrangement. We can still identify if there are other partners which can better deliver our needs. We seek that elsewhere. In the arrangements with the kind of shared businesses, everything goes through that business automatically.
And I did discuss a meeting I had with Andy Brown, I don't know when it was now, October I think. Cornwall does this with quite a lot of organisations. They actually do provide financial services to, I think it might be it's Exmoor or Dartmoor or something like that, I can't remember, but they're quite well versed in this, even if we're not. I don't know who was next.
Yes, Chairman.
I've
heard all that's been said, and I understand the intentions are good. But it is just possible that what comes back to us for approval, this council, we may not agree with what's been advised. Who will have the last word?
Council.
Council.
Yeah.
I'm sure then that there's no danger of this council being overruled. None whatsoever.
No danger.
No danger.
No danger.
No.
Remember that. Okay.
I said no.
Right. Well, worried, Steve.
I think what you need to do is to look at Cornwall in this instance. We'll say the financial stuff. Think of Cornwall as an officer, and council would still be in that situation.
Yeah.
Can I just say that with that in mind, the Section 151 officer has certain powers, which means he can overrule council, and it's nothing to do with whether he works for Cornwall or the Council of the Isles of Scilly. It's because he has a legal obligation if we don't set a balanced budget. Yeah. So from that perspective, yes, he can overrule council, but that's nothing to do with his relationship with Cornwall.
All right, I accept that. I also hear what you're saying. A Section 151 officer can overrule elected members. That is a true test of democracy.
Yep. And so can a monitoring officer.
I defer.
Brown.
Thank you. I think there is a very significant issue of timing here. If, as we have been reassured, a business plan comes back to full council, I understand that, but by the time the business plan has come back to full council, it will be pretty difficult to unravel something that councillors might not have approved in the first place. For example, a service area was actually mentioned within the agenda and papers of the Cornwall County Council's Policy and Resources Committee, where it was stated, and I'm being careful, although it is a public document, the Council of the Isles of Scilly have decided they would like further information on outsourcing this particular service. Now, as a councillor, I recognise I'm not on every committee and I'm not party or privy to everything, of course, I wouldn't expect to be. But this particular service area had only been mentioned in passing. Now, I'm not particularly making a comment as to whether or not the service area should or should not be devolved to either Cornwall or anybody else, but I'm just asking at what point we can put in a check and a balance so that elective members can actually decide that this is an area of the council's current service delivery that they would be prepared to support. Otherwise, quite frankly, we've moved to a de facto cabinet system without actually having voted for that particular system of working.
Can I reassure Councillor Grottek, the areas we are working on at the moment are the ones that were in the report on the 27th of September and have been repeated in paragraph 1.4 in this report. That is the list of areas that we're trying to develop schedules for and business cases to sit underneath.
I'm sorry, I don't wish to be rude, but there is an area covered in the report that I have read that went to the actual Cornwall County Council Policy and Resources Committee papers, actually mentioned an area that is not part of 1.4. And I can obviously bring that to your attention at a later date. And since it's a matter of public record, I have no problem in actually voicing it, but I was being very mindful that there are members of staff working in that particular area.
All I can say is these are the areas we're working on, no other areas.
Chairman, I think in that case we should ask Councillor Mrs Grottek to supply the relevant information to yourself and...
Yes, I should be happy to do that.
As soon as possible.
Yes, indeed, this afternoon.
What I was about to
suggest. Can I just make the point for information that contrary to what Councillor Mrs Grottek appears to believe, this council does not operate a cabinet system, it operates a committee system.
Chairman, I fully understand that. I was merely pointing out the dangers that if we did not put in, sorry Chairman, enough checks and balances.
Councillor Daly?
Chairman, I had further thoughts on that which I was going to raise, and that is, are we looking to go on a two-stage process here because of the urgency and because of the importance of the money? Are we thinking to go with Cornwall as a first effort and then go out to tender during next financial year?
Can
I think that...
the reason we're using an inter-authority agreement is that that then precludes it being a procurement exercise, in that you have a shared service with another authority, which means that you don't have to go through the tender exercise. When you do a tender as a service contract, we would then have to put 20% VAT on top. So as soon as you tender something, it becomes automatically more expensive. Therefore, an inter-authority agreement is a very sensible way to go forward. That doesn't mean that you can only have an inter-area agreement or inter-authority agreement with one authority. You can have a number. It can be the right authority for you, in the same way that we're using Exmoor for planning advice. So what I would say is we're developing a shared service with Cornwall, and its very nature of being shared means that it's a long-term relationship, which is why the legal agreements and the costs up front are so important. They have to be right. If they're not right, we can't jump into bed with them, whether we're in a hurry or not. It has to be done very systematically and very clearly, because it's not something you have a second bite of very easily, because your systems are completely integrated, and that's the whole basis of an inter-authority agreement.
So we're saying that realistically the other authority that we go into an agreement with is fixed. We're not going to change it, so there's no point in discussing it.
No, I don't think what is being said at all, Colin. I think it's taken case by case. This isn't anything particularly new for this authority. We have outsourced, we had adult social care from an authority in Wiltshire. We had a private company supporting children and education at one point. We've always had HR consultants. You know, they might come under a different name as service level agreements, but we have always sought the right place to actually get the best for our community. For instance, Wiltshire for adult social care support at one time. So the only ones currently that are going under in this inter-authority agreement, my understanding, are the ones that are listed under 1.4, because they are the only ones that members have approved.
Yeah.
And if we need to outsource another role, it would be incumbent on our officers to have a look around far and wide so that we actually get the right arrangements for this community.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much, Chris.
Yes, Christine, but having gone into an agreement with Cornwall, that's what it's going to be. It's not going to be we're going to change it to Devon after a year or two.
Not for these services.
Not for these.
Not for these. So there is no discussion on who we're going into.
I think the
We made
Chief
a decision in
Executive made
September.
quite clear that we would go to each and every authority as appropriate in the circumstances with the information at the time. There isn't any intention to lock us into an agreement with Cornwall exclusively. I think the Chief Executive made that very clear in his preamble, and Councillor Mrs Saville has confirmed that with her remarks about previous arrangements.
And the bottom line on this, we do have to go into an agreement with somebody. So, I do take your point, Colin, but...
I understand that, and I understand it's urgent. But it seems to me that we've just gone in with Cornwall because they're the nearest. We've got other agreements with them already and so on.
I believe the Chief Executive has examined other options somewhere.
The members voted on this in September.
Yeah. Well, this was of course discussed back in September 27th. A good example is waste. Yeah, we looked at various options of where could our waste go and how could we do this in the most effective way. So therefore, discussions have taken place with Plymouth, for instance, and with Cornwall, trying to identify where is the best way forward. What became very, very clear as part of those discussions, even looking slightly wider afield to other waste authorities, that Cornwall is by far the most effective way of disposing of our residual waste. So therefore, that was included as part of a schedule under the inter-authority agreement. Which was approved, yeah. But it takes a bit of time, of course, to work through the details, and that's what is happening at the moment.
And in a more general sense, we are, I think we're all aware, we're quite a small authority, and it's becoming increasingly difficult over time to actually pay for the level of specialisation we need in various areas, and we could get increasingly unfit for the 21st century as time goes on, unless we do something like this.
Yes, I'm fully aware of that, but also of the urgency.
Mr Chairman, sorry to interrupt, however, Diana and I have got a video conference for the Cornwall and Arsensilley Transport Board. Can we leave the meeting?
Well, enjoy.
Thank you.
Right.
You might run the risk of being in court if we're not careful.
Okay, well, I think can we...
Propose, Chairman.
Okay, so we have a proposer and a seconder, and before we can become in court, all those in favour? Any against? I believe that's carried then. Thank you very much, which brings the meeting to an end at 11:43.
11:43?
Sorry, 10:43.
That's good.
It seemed to take a lot.